So today is the SE 900 crash course, and essentially you're going to have your today's instructors, which is going to be myself, a Microsoft Technical Specialist intern, and we have George, who is a Microsoft Cloud Solution Architect. So I'll quickly just rush through the introduction because we've got a lot to cover in this session. So about this course, here's a little debrief about what the course is. But something also to note is that although this course is definitely going to help you, this crash course, I do really suggest that you go through all the learning modules that Microsoft provides by searching SE900 Learning Path into your search engines. So this is our course agenda. So the course is separated into 4 modules. You have module 1, which is going to describe the concepts of security, compliance, and identity. And then we're going to have module 2, which describes the capability of Microsoft Identity Access Management Solutions. And we've got module 3, which is going to describe the capabilities of Microsoft Security Solutions. And then we're going to have our last module, which is going to describe the capabilities of Microsoft Compliance Solutions. So all the content I'm sharing can be found on the website.
I'll provide the link.
Thank you. Awesome. And so as I said before, kind of here's a bit of a kind of way of delegation of how much all the modules count for in the exam. Without further ado, we'll get straight into the actual modules and teaching. So main thing with cybersecurity, we have this thing called zero trust. This is the main principle. I know it sounds very kind of counterintuitive, zero trust, but I'll explain what it is. So zero trust assumes that everything is an open and untrusted network, even your own corporate network. The zero trust model operates on the principle of trust no one and verify everything. By no longer trusting the integrity of the corporate network, security is strengthened. So the 3 guiding principles for zero trust are: 1, verify explicitly based on all available signals; 2, employ the privilege of least privileged access; and 3, assume breach. This approach also serves as an end-to-end strategy based on 6 foundational pillars. We have 1, identities, which verifies all the identities with strong authentication, devices, applications, network, infrastructure, and data. So when we talk about protecting your data, though, that's defense in depth, which uses a layered approach to security rather than relying on a single perimeter. A defense in depth strategy uses a series of mechanisms to slow the advance of an attack. Each layer provides protection so that if one layer is breached, a subsequent layer will prevent an attacker getting access to unauthorized access to data. And examples of layered securities might be, first one, physical securities, such as limiting access to data centers. Then you have identity and access. So this layer is all about double checking that the access is only granted to those who need it and what they need it for. Then you have the perimeter. So this layer is all about filtering the large scale attacks. And then you have network. So if there is an attack on this layer can ensure that it is not spreading to the rest of your services. Then you have your compute layer. So think Patch Tuesdays and making sure that all the systems are properly secured and you have the right controls in place. And then you have your application layer. So this is where devs are integrating security into their designs. So the apps are protected by default. Then you have your data layer. So this is making sure that those who have access to data are responsible for securing and storing it and adhering to the compliance requirements. Now we're moving on to CIA, and this isn't your fun little Men in Black CIA, it's a little bit different. So CIA is all about security trade-offs. So you have your confidentiality. So this is referring to the need to keep confidential, sensitive data, such as customer information, passwords, or financial data. So you can encrypt data to keep it confidential, but then you also need to keep the encryption keys confidential. So confidential is probably the most visible part of security. But the reason why it's a trade-off is thinking about having to pick if you're going to favor more integrity or favoring more availability. So availability is referring to making data available to those who need it. However, if you're going to have that, then you can have a lower integrity. And integrity is referring to keeping data or messages. So really, it is you as a security administration figuring out what you prioritize as a company. So moving on, we have the shared responsibility models. This is a very important diagram, so just try to have a mental picture of this. So this identifies the security tasks that are handled by the cloud provider and which security tasks are handled by you, the customer. So the responsibilities vary depending on where the workload is hosted. So you have your first one, which is moving from right to left. So you have your on-premise data. So this is in an on-premise data center. You are responsible for everything from physical security to encrypting sensitive data. So this is the one that requires a lot of work, and it's all you. And then we're going to move on to infrastructure as a service. So for all cloud services, IaaS requires the most management by the cloud customer. So with IaaS, you are using the cloud provider computing infrastructure, but the cloud customer isn't responsible for the physical components, such as computers and the networks or the physical security of the data center. However, the cloud customer still has the responsibility of the software components and operating systems, network controls, applications, and protecting data. And then we're moving on to platform as a service. So this provides an environment. So this essentially, PaaS is for your developers. So PaaS provides an environment for building, testing, and deploying software applications. So the goal is to help you quickly create an application without managing the underlying infrastructure. So the cloud provider manages the hardware and operating system, and the customer, so you, are responsible for the applications and data. And then we're going to move on to the last one, which is software as a service. This is one that we probably use the most, really. So this is SaaS, and it's hosted and managed by the cloud provider for the customer. It's usually licensed through monthly or annual subscription. Think Microsoft 365, Skype, Dynamics CRM Online, all examples of SaaS software. And it requires the least amount of management by the cloud customer, and the cloud provider is responsible for managing everything except data, devices, accounts, and identities. So for all cloud deployment types, you, the cloud customer, are responsible for your own data and identities, and you're responsible for protecting the security of your data and identities at on-premise resources. So moving on, so I've told you a little bit about data, but it's also really important to know some common threats. And this is kind of the one that I always find really important, because this is kind of what really made me go, oh, wow, okay, cybersecurity is very common and occurs and makes you really go, okay, right. So first we have data breaches, and I'm sure you've heard that term come around in the news, data breach. But what exactly is it? A data breach is where there's some sort of data that is stolen. And then we have dictionary attacks. So this is where an attacker is trying to steal an identity by finding a username and then trying a huge amount of passwords until one works and the attacker is in. So think of those movies, you know, those hacker movies, and the hacker goes and then he's like, I'm in, kind of like that. And then you have ransomware code. So this is code that makes your way into applications and locks you out. And the attacker will then demand for money in exchange for your account. So holding you hostage, going, I'm not going to, give you account to I'm not going to give you an Instagram account until you give me 100K. That's ransomware example. And then you have disruptive attacks. So this is an example of when an attacker can be sending so much traffic to a website that they're overwhelming the target and it can take the website down. And this then can prevent legitimate traffic from accessing the website. And then there's a few other common threats. There's coin miners, rootkits, Trojan, worms, exploits, and exploit kits. So I've given you a lot of threats that can happen, and it can be kind of scary. But don't be fearful, because there are ways to mitigate this. So one way to mitigate against common cybersecurity threats is to encrypt sensitive or valuable data. Encryption is the process of making data unreadable and unusable to unauthorized viewers, essentially scrambling data like scrambled eggs that I had this morning for breakfast. So the only way that data can be used or read is that the user must decrypt the data, which requires the use of a secret key. And basically, there's two types of encryption. There's symmetric and asymmetric. Symmetric encryption uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt the data. Nice and simple. But then you have asymmetric encryption, which uses a public key and a private key. Either key can encrypt the data, but a single key can't be used to decrypt an encrypted data. To decrypt, you need a paired key. And then we also have hashing. So it's very important though to know the difference, because I myself, when I first was learning all this stuff, was getting quite confused between the difference between encryption and hashing. So what hashing is an algorithm to convert the original text to unique fixed length hash value. So each time the same text is hashed using the same algorithm, the same hash value is produced. That hash can then be used as a unique identifier for its associated data. But hashing algorithms are becoming known to hackers because hash functions are deterministic. So the same input produces the same output. So hackers can then use brute force dictionary tags by hashing with passwords. So for every matched hash, they know the actual password to mitigate this. But so now we're going, well, I've hashed, and then they already know how to hash. You're kind of going stressed. Don't be stressed, because there's this thing called, we can salt passwords. So this refers to adding a fixed length random value to the input of hash functions to create unique hashes for every input. So hackers can't know your salt value, and you know that your hash passwords will now be more secure. And then moving on, now we have, now JC honestly does hate. So now we're going to move on to our next thing, which is Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So I've given you a lot of information. We're not even that, it's got a lot to go, but if you're quite overwhelmed, please don't be, because we have this thing called the Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a collection of documents that has the best guidance and practices that support security and compliance. And it's a free tool, and it's going to help you create an actionable plan. So each of the following steps is part of the cloud adoption lifecycle. So we've got strategy, which is going to define business justification and expected outcomes of adoption. And we've got the plan. So that's going to align actionable and adoption plans to business outcomes. And then you're going to, and we're ready, you're going to prepare the cloud environment for plan changes. And then we're going to adopt. So we're going to migrate, modernizing existing workloads, innovate. So we're going to develop cloud native or hybrid solutions. And then we've got our governance. So that's going to govern the environment of workloads. And lastly, manage. So that's operation management for cloud solution hybrids. So you passed the first lesson, which is really exciting. So now we're going to move into the second lesson, which is all about describing identity concepts. So if I hadn't scared you enough with different kind of threats, I'm going to tell you a few more. So we've got password-based attacks. So as I mentioned before, a brute force attack is when the attacker will attempt to gain access simply by trying a bunch of different usernames and password combinations. But then we also have credential stuffing. So the attacker will use known stolen credentials, usually obtained after a data breach, on one side to attempt access to other accounts. And then you've got your password spray attacks. So your attacker will commonly apply spray, a commonly used password, against many different accounts. And then we have phishing. This one hits a little bit close to home because I was so close to being phished a few years ago, but that didn't happen. Luckily, I was saved. But yes, anyways, please don't do what I did and almost fall for one. But what is a phishing attack exactly? It's when a hacker sends an email that appears to come from a reputable source. So think about your boss. And well, it looks like your boss. And email contains a credible story, such as a security breach, instructing the user to sign in and change the password. Instead of going to a legitimate website, the user is going to be directed to a scammer's website, where they enter their username and password, but now the hacker has captured the user's identity and their password. Kind of scary. So don't fall for really fishy emails. And then you also have spear phishing. So this is when a hacker will build database information about users, which can be used to create highly credible emails. So the email will come from someone in your organization, then request information. So identity, but you know what's interesting now though, is that identity, as I mentioned before, was the first line of the original placeholder. But now, because there's such a big amount of remote workers, identity is almost becoming the first layer of defense. So there's 4 pillars with identity. You have administration. So this is all about the creation and management of identities for users, devices, and services. And then we have authentication. So the authentication pillar tells the story of how much particular assurance for particular identity is enough. In other words, how much does an IT system need to know about an identity to have sufficient proof they know they really are. So think of authentication as verifying and proving the user's identity, proving who they say they are. And then you have authorization. So this is actually, once a person's approved, then you're determining the level of access for this authenticated person. with the whole least privileged access in mind. And then you have auditing. So this is the tracking who does what, where, and when. This is including in-depth reporting, alerts, and governance of identities. So now we're also moving on to modern authentication. So modern authentication is an umbrella term for authentication and authorizing methods between a client, such as your laptop or a phone, and a server, like a website or application. At the center of modern authentication is a role of the identity provider, which maintains manages identity information while offering authentication, authorizing, and auditing services. So with modern authentication, a client will communicate with the identity provider by giving an identity that can be authenticated. When the identity, which can be a user or an application, has been verified, the identity provider issues a security token that the client will then send to the server. Then the server validates security tokens saying, yep, right. So that's done through trust relationships with the identity provider. Then by using that security token and the information that's contained with it, the user or the application accesses the required resources on the token and the information it contains and is stored and managed by the identity provider. So this centralized identity provider is supplying the authentication service. So Microsoft Azure Directory is an example of cloud-based identity provider. But other examples are Twitter, Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, and GitHub. So think of it when you're applying for a store or some kind of website and they go log in through Google, log in through Facebook, log in through Twitter. That's what this is. And then moving on, I'm going to explain to you the concept of federated services. This took a little bit for me to understand, so don't stress if it takes you a hot minute as well. So what it is, federation enables the access of services across organizational or domain boundaries by establishing trust relationships with respective domains identity providers. So with federation, there's no need for a user to maintain different usernames and passwords when accessing resources in other domains. So a simplified way of thinking about this is this scenario. So the website uses authentication services of IDPA. Then the user authenticates with IDPB. And IDPA has a trust relationship configured with IDPB. When the user credentials are passed to the website trusts the users and allows access. So with federation, trust isn't always bidirectional. Although IDPA may trust IDPB and allow the user in domain B to access website in domain A, the opposite isn't always true unless the trust relationship is configured. So a common example of federation in practice is when a user logs in to a third-party site with their social media account, just as I was saying before, such as Twitter. In this scenario, Twitter is the identity provider and the third-party site might be using different identity provider, such as Azure AD, and there's that trust relationship between Azure AD and Twitter. So in the last little section, before moving on to module 2, I'm just going to explain the concept of directory services and Active AD. So in the context of computer network, a directory is a hierarchical structure that stores information about objects on a network. A directory service stores directory data and makes it available to network users, administration services, and applications. So Active Directory, AD, is a set of directory services developed by Microsoft as a part of Windows 2000 on-premise domain-based networks. So the best known service of this kind is Active Directory Domain Services. It stores information about the members of the domain, including devices, users, verifies their credentials, and defines the access right. Then a server running ADDS is a domain controller. ADDS is a centralized component in organizations with on-premise IT infrastructure, and it gives organizations the ability to manage multiple on-premise infrastructure components and systems using a single identity user per user. AD does not natively support mobile devices, but SaaS applications or line business apps that require modern authentication methods. That's our first module done. So now we're going to move back to George to explain module 2.
Thanks, Cailin. And hi, everybody. I'm just going to click the take control and hopefully it will. Hey. All right, so before we move on, because we made some pretty good time, were there any questions? Like, you can jump off mute or you can just type them in chat. If you're there and don't have a question, can you just do a reaction? Do like a thumbs up, love heart, smiley face, whatever makes you happy. Fantastic. We have people listening. If there's no questions, that's completely cool. And I'll get started. I possibly can't match Cailin's hyper energy though. So it's awesome to be presenting with her. So module 2, I'm going to talk a bit about the capabilities of the Microsoft Identity and Access Management solutions. And welcome. We've got 4 items in this module. So we're going to explore the services and identity types of Azure Active Directory. Cailin was just speaking about Active Directories. Active Directory is a IDP that she was mentioning earlier. We're going to explore the authentication capabilities of Azure Active Directory, explore the access management capabilities of Azure Active Directory, and describe identity protection governance capabilities of Azure Active Directory. So in the first module, there was an emphasis on identity being the security boundary, and that's absolutely the truth. You use this single identity across multiple services, whether it's to log into your device or log into a cloud service. So if you lose your identity, you actually lose everything. And if you're using that identity to log into multiple third-party services, then yeah, you're kind of really owned. So pay attention. Hopefully we've got some MFA in here somewhere, and we'll teach you what you need to know to get through the exam. So Azure Active Directory, as you can see in that diagram, it's really the core of the Microsoft Cloud. It's the identity provider that gives access to Azure and its cloud resources, Office 365. You can use it to log into your devices, and you can use it to log into your business partners. It also can have a really tight integration with the Windows Active Directory on premise, and that means you can use the same credential to log in on premises and to your on-premises apps. So it's a key security resource, and it's something that needs to be protected appropriately. There's 4 types of identities in Azure AD. You've got the user accounts. They're the accounts which you'd be used to seeing or using. They look exactly the same as any other account in Azure AD. So if you had a Hotmail, Gmail, GitHub, Xbox, any of these accounts, that's what an Azure AD user account looks like. It's got the username, and then it has the username @ and then a domain. You have a device account. A device account isn't one that you'll necessarily see, because it's one that the device uses to authenticate its activity with the Azure AD. You'll see a service principal. Service principals are used for applications to communicate with Azure AD. If you're writing, say, a web app and you want to be able to access user data, then you need to have a service principal so that that web app can be assigned the appropriate permissions to access that data in your tenant. If you don't use a service principal, then you'll be relying on the user signing in every single time a call was made, or they'd have to log in at the start of every single session. The service principal simplifies that, and you'll have a lot of applications where there isn't actually a user. So you need to have an entity that allows you to authenticate the activity between the 2 services, whether it's an application or quickly. Thank you. And the last one is a managed identity. Managed identities are very similar to service principals, but you can use them in Azure Active Directory, and a managed identity is usually tied to a specific resource. So when you're creating that resource in Azure, you're able to also tick a box to create a managed identity, and then that identity is used to authenticate with other services on behalf of that resource. So You can also use external identities. So these are social logins. Here we've got Google, Microsoft account. So that's not an Azure AD account. That's a consumer Microsoft account, and Facebook. You can use these to authenticate into Azure AD, but you need to use a different directory. You actually stand up another Azure AD instance, and it's called the B2C. Apologies. The other type of collaboration is the B2B, and that's between other Office 365 or Microsoft 365 tenants. So if you've got two enterprise customers and they both are merging, for instance, it might be that you're not quite ready to move everyone from one to the other. So you can create up a B2B relationship and you get almost full access from one tenant into the other. But it's enough that you can manage your environment appropriately and have good collaboration. So Teams, calendars, emails, all those things. The hybrid identity model is one where you have your on-premises identity. So you might have an environment that's been established in, set up for 20, 30 years, and that will primarily be centered around a Windows Active Directory. And then the organization wants to or has already moved to the cloud using Office 365. There are still some very few organizations that aren't really in Office 365, but they're getting pretty rare now. But what happens is you'll create your Office 365 environment, and then you install what's called the Azure AD connector, and then it runs the Azure AD Connect service. And when you go through setting it up, you actually choose how you want to link the on-premise to the cloud user account. But once it's done, it essentially allows it so that you can treat the user account as a single account. They are two discrete accounts, but they synchronize the changes from one to the other. And depending on how you've set it up, you can have it so that it synchronizes changes from the cloud back to your on-premises Active Directory as well. So for all intents and purposes, it's a single user account, and that's why it's considered hybrid. Oh. Authentication capabilities of the Azure Active Directory. So authentication methods using the security defaults. Security defaults, I'm going to talk about that before I talk about MFA. Security defaults is a feature. It's not even a feature. It's a default set of settings that Microsoft has introduced. Before the tenant was quite vanilla, like a standard Windows Server install. There wasn't really any security customization put in. But when Office 365 was released, you could almost say either people were more naive or cybersecurity wasn't as a priority, right? There was cybercrime, but it wasn't anything like it is now. As the cloud has grown and all of our software as a service offerings have grown, so has the capabilities of cyber criminals, because they can also leverage them, and they're very clever with how they do that. So basically, the security stance for organizations has had to improve, and in order to make it easier for organizations like small businesses that might have only 5 users, they've implemented what's called the security defaults, because it's not reasonable to perhaps expect these people to have the knowledge or capability to do it. Once you've got your SC 900, you'd be probably ahead of, 95% of enterprise people, because you've invested a little bit of time in learning about security. So if that's the case, then Microsoft had to do something in order to protect their customers, which also protects themselves. So they introduced the security defaults. There's only 4 settings, and essentially the security defaults more or less enabled MFA and changed the way that we can. Where do we have it in our notes? So the defaults are enforced Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication registration for all users. And then it forces the administrators to use multi-factor authentication. And it also requires users to complete multi-factor authentication when needed. And that when needed is a bit vague, but essentially it's when the user is doing something that is potentially changing their account or harmful, or logging into sensitive information or prompt MFA. So security defaults are now enabled by default. So the tenant is more secure by default. If you have MFA enabled, then you're more than likely to block 99% of all cyber attacks, because they just go for low-hanging fruit and people that don't have MFA. And it might feel like really obvious, oh, you should just have MFA. But before security defaults was enabled, more than half of the Office 365 tenant, or more than half of the Office 365 users did not have MFA enabled. So, and these are people doing business. And then I want you to think about all of your cloud accounts and how many of them you've enabled MFA for. I think that there was like some 98% of Gmail accounts did not have MFA enabled. Yeah, it was like such a high number. I struggled to believe it, but I believe the person who told me is honest. So yeah, like it was insane. So having MFA is important. And if you don't know what MFA is, I'm about to tell you. So it stands for multi-factor authentication. It requires more than one form of verification. So typically you would have your username and your password. Multi-factor authentication would like you to have something which is your password, and then either something you have or something you are. So I have an iPhone and I use the Authenticator app, and it uses Face ID. So that is something you are, but it's also in combination with something you have, because the Authenticator app is on my phone, right? So I don't sign in with a password, but I have the Authenticator app on my phone, and that phone is unique to me. So it's still unique like a password. And the way I've set it up in the Authenticator app to approve it is that it checks that it's me. Now, there's other ways that you can do this. That's just how it's set up, but it just illustrates how that works. If you see on this screenshot here, you can also see there are different ways you can verify. So you can use the Authenticator app. You can use another Authenticator app rather than the Microsoft one. So there's LastPass, there's Google, GitHub, lots of different apps. And you can also receive a text message and a phone call, though text message and phone call are only offered if you've got an Azure AD P2 license. And text messages are known to be insecure because they're easy to dupe people with or hijack, and no one likes to take phone calls anymore. So I'd probably encourage you to go with the Authenticator app. We're putting a lot of time into developing it. All right. So here's some examples or the different authentication methods, and I will need to go a little bit quicker. But first is the passwords, and it might look like, oh wow, these are really obvious passwords. These would be like probably the top 5 passwords that get used if they collated all of them. So a password on its own is bad, and they're really bad passwords. And then you can have a password and a second factor. So either the SMS or voice, and that's good, but not great. Better is the Authenticator, and that's kind of like the bottom line where you should start. And best is passwordless, right? Because until that point, all of these still use a password and one of these mechanisms. But for the passwordless, when I sit down at my laptop, it looks at me, it remembers me from, when I registered, and it just lets me in. All right. And then if I'm going to a cloud service that I haven't logged into for a little while, or the authentication is set up so that it has to check who I am again, it'll try and log me in, and it'll send a push notification to my phone. So, this is the best because it's the most secure, because someone can steal my laptop, but they can't log in. And if they knew my password, they still couldn't log in because I'd have to respond to a prompt. FIDO2 security keys are like UB keys. I don't know if any of you know what UB keys are. My desk is too messy to find mine, sorry. But essentially, it's just like a little USB thing you can plug in, And you can see on here, even it's got this yellow, this blue circle. That blue circle is a fingerprint sensor. So you would press your fingerprint. So you plug it in, and that is the what you have. And then you do your fingerprint, and that is the who you are. Azure AD supports all of these. I think that's the point of this slide. So Windows Hello, or Windows Hello for Business. See that Windows Hello is built into most Windows now, like most recent ones anyway. Windows Hello for Business takes it a step further and adds layers of security and integrates into Azure AD. So Windows Hello allows you to log into your commercial Windows account, an on-premise Active Directory account, an Azure Active Directory account, or an identity provider that supports FIDO2. And the Windows Hello experience is much better because that login is specific to the device, right? So the most basic way of logging in is using a PIN, but you can also use other biometrics. So you can use the facial recognition, you can use a finger swipe if you've got a fingerprint reader. And when you go through and set it up, you put your password in, but then if you're only using that device, you shouldn't need to remember your password because it'll always be remembered on the device. And then when you go to log into services in the cloud, the way Windows Hello is set up, you don't need to type that password into the cloud. You need to verify using your device, and your device becomes the password. So yes, that means you can have really long, complicated passwords. Now, self-service password reset, it might be weird. Why is this a security benefit? All right. It's a security benefit because it allows people to have a more complicated password. And it also allows there to be intelligence in the back end where if the authentication provider thinks, so if Azure AD thinks that this is not the user, it can actually lock the account, or it can block the account. And then rather than generating a call to the service desk to unlock the account, the user can remediate it themselves and do a self-service password reset. So it reduces the calls to your service desk. It allows the users to manage their account problems themselves, even if it's 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And like I said, it allows you to do more interesting security things. So the self-service password reset relies on having multi-factor authentication set up so that the user can verify they are who they promise they are. You know, if there wasn't this strong verification, then self-service password reset would be an awesome way to steal credentials, right? So you need to be able to protect the account appropriately. So it uses the same mechanism as the MFA, and you can verify yourself with these. So password protection is a service built in for free to Azure AD for cloud-only accounts. And it can also be an add-on service that you can put into your Windows Active Directory if you've got appropriate licensing. And it gives you the ability so that when a user goes to change their password, you can have it so that it won't allow certain passwords. So you can have a manually created global banned password list. You can also have a custom banned one. So if your company is, you know, a soccer team or a football team, you can put the football team's name in the banned list. Or if the World Cup is on, you'd probably want to put the, you know, country, the top scorer, or, you know, whoever's doing the best repeat clips, because people will put things that are top of mind in, and that psychology is well understood by the attackers. Having the password protection also protects against password spray in two ways. A password spray, like Cailin mentioned earlier, is where they'll have a specific account and they'll just attack that account with what it thinks as known passwords. So the flip side to that is password protection also has a leaked credentials list that's a part of the global banned password list. So if a user account has been leaked, that password will no longer be allowed to be used, even if like the username and password combination is from a different service not related to Azure AD. So it's really good. And that hybrid security is the features for the top three can be allowed on Windows Active Directory on premises by installing an agent. How are we going? Are we alive? Yeah, we got one nod. Any thumbs up? Thank you for the thumbs. Any questions? We're good. Cool. So conditional access is my favorite thing about Active Directory. But I'm a bit of a security nerd. So if you don't share my enthusiasm, I won't be offended. But conditional access takes, what's already reasonably secure and makes it very secure, right? So we all understand conditional access, but probably in different contexts. It's like when you're kids and you say, Mum, I want to go to the park. Mum will say, well, you have to clean your bedroom first. So it's conditional that you can do it, right? So conditional access is exactly the same, except it uses the things built into Active Directory to be the conditions. So you'll see here, there's different signals for that conditional access attempt. And here we've got the user, the device, real-time risk and application. Oh, sorry, I should include the location because we capture location data for every login. So you can set up a policy to log into, a sensitive service or, even a license restricted service or however you like, whatever commercial or security reason you have for putting that restriction in, and say only users in a specific group logging in from authorized devices that are up to date and have all of the appropriate settings configured can log into, SharePoint Online. And then you can have another layer if you're managing the device using the Microsoft Endpoint Manager. You'd be able to put a compliance policy in it, and that compliance will say, you must have the up-to-date Windows updates, must be the latest version of Windows, must have disk encryption, must be registered for Windows Hello for Business. Like you can put pretty much any configuration item, you can have a compliance policy for it. And then you can say the device must be compliant. And that really leans into the zero trust that Cailin mentioned earlier, because you need to be able to verify every access attempt. There's also a feature in conditional access, like typically with conditional access, it'll be evaluated and then allowed access and then, go to town, do what you want to do. But there's a new thing that's built in now, which actually draws a line back to here, and that's called continuous access evaluation. I think, is it in the notes? No. So, but basically every time you try and access that data or evaluate it, in the past, it would just go here and get a token. And then, you'd go just like directly from the device to the app without being evaluated. But now with that continued access evaluation, every single transaction between the device will be evaluated. And if for whatever reason that block is in place, because it's evaluated every time, it'll get blocked. Whereas before, even if you revoke the session, there would be up to a 30-minute lag based on the way the modern authentication works. So conditional access is really great. And one last thing, you can use conditional access to force traffic to go through a third-party proxy, so you can monitor what the user is doing, and also stop things like blocking downloads or requiring a login once an hour, or however much you hate your users and want to make their experience miserable. You can drag it right down, or you could make it once a day, because typically a login is good for 30 days. I think that's the default. So like there's a lot of control. Role-based access control. So this is talking about Azure AD Roles, which is a little bit, there's a lot of similar terminology. Role-based access control is just like a default security term, and essentially you would have a user with a role, and you're meant to map all of the things that a user needs, and then you define a persona and you assign security access to that persona or security group, which is for that persona, and then you add users to the group. So that's your default role-based access control. In Azure AD, a lot of that mapping has been done for you, and that's your built-in roles. So there's, the first user account in Office 365 is called the global administrator, and they can do everything. So you need to protect that. But there's many other roles: user administrator, billing administrator, security administrator, compliance administrator, web app administrator, DevOps administrator. I think there's about 50. I'm not going to list them all. But they're all predefined. And you'll probably find that in order to do what you need to do, sometimes you'll need to assign 2 or 3 roles. And to be honest, it depends on your level of rigor and your risk appetite, but that could be okay. It does not follow the idea of assigning the least privileged possible. I can't remember the proper term, but essentially you don't want to give more than someone needs to do what they need to do, but that takes work. But you can, and that's using custom roles. So each role is made up of a series of permissions. So you could go through and create your own custom roles for your organizations with the permissions you need for the job, but it's a lot of work. It would be lower down on the list of things I would do if I was trying to uplift the security in an organization. So the Azure AD role-based access control means that you are able to assign roles to the users. And you can also do things like assign an Azure AD role to a security group, and then you can add the user to the security group. So you can use a similar model as the more legacy RBAC. And the thing is, you only want to grant access to the users that they need in order to do their job. Identity protection and governance capabilities. So every user having an identity is wonderful, but it requires maintenance, right? So it kind of feels obvious that a user would sign in, or sorry, a user would be employed, they'll be given a user account, then the user would leave the job and they'll take the user account back. But that doesn't always happen. Organizations are really good at onboarding new users, because if they're not onboarded, the user sits there twiddling their thumbs. But they're not always good at offboarding, especially if that user who has been offboarded ends up with like a lot of resources that they're the owner of, and only they are the owner of it, and deleting it would leave an orphaned resource, which could make it stop working. So you'll find that identities will end up being left for a lot longer than they're needed. And the problem with that is every identity is an additional thing that needs to be protected, needs to be managed. And, if a person's using their user account and someone steals it and changes the password, they're going to know pretty quick. If you have, I'll call it a legacy user account, because the user's no longer using it, but it's doing its function as a part of a solution, it's probably highly credentialed or highly authorized, and it might be some time before you know that that account had been stolen, especially if it doesn't get used to interfere with it. So identity governance is really important. Identity governance is actually a product, Azure AD Identity Governance, and inside it there's a thing called Privileged Identity Management, which allows you to assign an Azure AD role to a user, but only make them eligible. And then when the user needs to do an activity that requires additional privilege, they can go into the Privileged Identity Management and elevate into that role for a short period of time. And it's usually between 1 and 8 hours. And then after that, it will take the permission away, which is great. And then the next time they need it, they can go back in and elevate it again. So, the user has, one small extra step, but if their user account is stolen, the default permission for that user account is not so privileged. And You can also make it so that if someone needs to elevate, there's additional sort of governance steps, like you could require multi-factor authentication prompt to be passed, or you could make it so that someone else has to approve that elevation. All right, so even if the account did get stolen and the person knew how to use PIM who'd stolen it, that would prevent that elevation. The other part of identity governance is like managing the user access that I was talking about. So you can have access reviews. So you can have an access review, and if the user doesn't respond to the access review, they lose access. So you could also have in that access review things like, do you need these Azure AD roles? Do you need access to these security groups? Do you need your user account? And if you don't respond, you can have like automatically lose access. You can make it so that it's the manager's job to respond on behalf of the users. Like there's lots of flexibility there, but it helps to manage that identity governance, which is a real problem when it's unmanaged. Entitlement. Oh, so I spoke about access reviews. That's good. So entitlement management helps understand, like, if a user joins and they're joining in this function, what do they need to be entitled to? What things do they need in order to do that role? So you can set up an entitlement package and then assign it to a user. All right, so that's like it's like role-based access control, but rather than like it being for just giving access to things, it's also like things being security groups. You know, it could be also licensing. It could be permission to like collaboration type resources, so like your SharePoint or your OneDrive or your Teams, and many other things. So you need to have the right level of license for this, but once it's set up, it can take care of a lot of the troubles or, you know, small jobs that get ignored. So PIM, I spoke about this already, so I'm going to skip. The Azure Identity Protection. This is built into Azure AD, and it's like a cloud threat protection service that protects your logins. So there's two types of things it does. It has the sign-in risk and the user identity risk. All right. So, and I always get it mixed up. So I'm not going to tell you which is which, but one, actually the notes will probably tell me. Then I'd have to read them. So one looks at the user, right? So as a user, you'll normally log in from the same location. So like your same internet address or same geographic location. So I'm in Perth. Most of my logins will look like they come from Perth. All right. Except if I'm in the Microsoft Office, then my logins look like they come in from Singapore, because that's where the data exits. And then if I use my Windows 365 Cloud PC, my logins will come in from Australia East. So that's somewhere in the Sydney area, right? So I have logins come in from 3 places, but I'll do that regularly enough that the identity provider will know that, okay, that's kind of where I sign in. So if for some reason I sign in from London, it's going to go, that doesn't make sense. You don't normally sign in from there, and it might ask me for an MFA prompt. However, if my last access was, say, I don't know, 5 p.m. on a Friday, and then my next access was 5 days later from another country, it's less risky than if I have one login from Perth and one login from London at the same time. All right. That'll trigger what's called an impossible travel alert, because it's literally impossible for a human to travel from one place to the other. So it actually generates a security alert for the security teams to investigate, and it asks the user to do stuff to understand whether or not it's that user. All right. So there is that. You've got your other things. So it'll look at your device and your device risk. So if you have your device being managed and there was a whole series of new exploits being published, and you have that software on your computer that's known to be exploited, or even there's a security ticket for your computer and that has been exploited, it might block your login, right? And that's just to protect the organization, and it's so that you protect your, so you could have to remediate your desktop device or your phone or whatever it is first. So basically, the identity protection uses uses a lot of signals, either from the login or from the device or from the third-party security information to determine whether or not a login is safe. And then if it's not safe, if as a user they think that you're suspect, they'll ask you to either change your password or do a MFA prompt. It's free for cloud only. You need to have Azure AD Premium for thing. Who took my presentation from you? And now it's gone.
That was me. I'm so sorry about technical difficulties. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're right.
I got a bit excited and I was like, oh, okay. And I'll present again.
Am I almost finished?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's your last.
I thought we're there. Look, you can drive for the last one.
Okay.
Should let you resume as well, right?
I'm sorry for the guest. But brief intermission.
Okay.
But there we go. We are here. There we go.
Awesome.
Sorry about
that. Like really, I was like literally. That's it. Like that was the last one. So you're good now. Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm sorry about that again.
That's
so
fine.
cool. We're halfway in our team. Sorry about the whole technical difficulties, but broke up all the learning. So now we're on module 3. First of all, pat on the back that you made it this far. And let's get to the finish line. So I'm quickly just explain. So right now we're going to go through the capabilities of Microsoft Security Solutions. So there's a few things that we're going to be going through this module. It's quite a big module, so it's good that we've got quite a bit of time to go through module 3 and module 4 and take our time, plus time for some knowledge checks and some Q&A. So let's begin this big module. So first, I'm going to describe some basic security capabilities in Azure. So an Azure Virtual Network is similar to the network you'd find in your organization. It enables different Azure resources. For instance, an Azure Virtual Machine, a VM, to securely communicate with other VNets, the internet, or your on-premise network. But you are going to want to limit the amount of traffic you're going to let in and out of your virtual network. This is where network security groups come in. So network security groups let you allow or deny network traffic to and from your Azure resources that exist in your Azure virtual network. For example, a virtual machine, an NSG, consists of rules that define how traffic is filtered and is evaluated by a priority using 5 points: information source port, protocol, as well as port range, direction, and action. So this will allow or deny the traffic. So you can associate 0 or 1 network security groups to each virtual network subnet and network interface in a virtual machine. The same network, a security group, however, can be associated to as many different subnets and network interfaces as you choose. But as a guideline and some advice for myself is that you shouldn't create 2 security rules with the same priority and direction. In the above, so the example that I'm showing here, highly simplified diagram, which is great because I'm a visual learner, so this very much helps explain it to me as well. So as you can see, you've got an Azure Virtual Network with 2 subnets that are connected to the internet, and each subnet has a virtual machine. Subnet 1 has the NSG assigned to it that's filtering in and output access to VM1, which needs a high level of access. And we've got, in contrast, VM2, which could represent a public-facing machine that doesn't require an NSG. And then moving on, we have the Azure DDoS protection. So as we learned before, the aim of a distributed denial of service attack is to overwhelm your resources on your applications and servers, making them unresponsive or slow for genuine users. So this is where Azure DDoS protection comes in. So the way it works is that Azure has a built-in service that is monitoring the traffic for your attacks coming into your network. And once it recognizes it's an attacker, it's going to automatically block the traffic and leave your network open for legitimate traffic, which is pretty awesome. But you know what's even better is that during a DDoS attack, Azure can scale your computing needs. So the protection manages cloud consumption by ensuring that your network load only reflects actual customer usage. So if there is a brute attack, you're not going to be paying for your attackers' traffic, which is, nice to know. So that's a really awesome perk I think I find with that protection. So Azure Firewall is a cloud-based network security service that also protects your Azure virtual networks, VNet, resources from attackers. So you can deploy Azure Firewall on any virtual network, but the best approach is to use a centralized virtual network. All your other virtual and on-premise networks will then route through it. So some key features of Azure Firewall will be the high availability built in, so there's nothing to configure. Also, Azure Firewall can be configured to span multiple availability zones for increased availability. And also there's network application level filtering. So using the IP address and protocol to support fully qualified domain filtering, the outbound HTTPS traffic and network filtering controls. Then we also have the outbound SNAT and inbound DNAT to communicate with internet resources. So here it's going to translate the private IP address of network resources to an Azure public address. So source network address translation to identify and allow traffic originating from a virtual network to internet destinations. Similarly, inbound internet traffic to firewall public IP address is translated. And then also we've got the multiple IP addresses, and what I also think was one of the coolest ones is the threat intelligence. So threat intelligence-based filtering can be enabled for your firewall to alert and deny traffic from and to any malicious IP and address domains. And then lastly, you've got your integration with Azure Monitor. So integrated with Azure Monitor to enable collecting, analyzing, and acting on telemetry from Azure Firewall logs. So although you can have your firewall set up and your NSG set up, so the net security groups, if you had remote desktop protocol set up, you've just exposed yourself to different attacks. But don't fear, that's why we have Azure Bastion. So Azure Bastion provides secure, seamless RDP/SSH connectivity to your virtual machines directly from your Azure portal using the Transport Layer Security, TLS. So when you connect Azure Bastion, your virtual machines don't need public IP address, an agent, or special client software. Bastion provides secure RDP and SSH connectivity to all VMs in a virtual network in which it's provisioned. Using Azure Bastion protects your virtual machines from exposing RDP/SSH ports to the outside world while still providing secure access using RDP/SSH. That sounds really awesome, and I still really couldn't believe it when I first learned about this. So moving on. So we've looked at how to protect your virtual networks, your virtual machines, and your networks, your data using NSGs and firewalls. But we also need to look at protecting your web applications. So this is where the web application firewalls comes in, also known as WAF, which is one of my favorite acronyms ever. So this provides a centralized protection for your web applications from commonly known vulnerabilities like SQL and cross-site scripting. So preventing such attacks in application code is really challenging and basically can require rigorous maintenance and patching and monitoring. But a centralized WAF helps make security management simpler, improves the response time to security threat, and allows patching a known vulnerability in one place instead of securing each web application. A WAF also gives application administrators better assurance of protection against threats and intrusions. So we've covered encryption a bit earlier before, as you remembered in Module 1, but here we're going to look at encryption again and how it works with Azure Storage. So you've got Azure Storage Service Encryption, and that helps protect data at rest by automatically encrypting it before saving it to Azure Managed Disk, so Azure Blob Storage, Azure Files, Azure Q Storage, and then decrypts the data before retrieval automatically. And then you have your Azure Disk Encryption. So this helps encrypt Windows and Linux infrastructure virtual machine desktops. And then Azure Disk Encryption uses industry standard BitLocker feature of Windows and then de-encrypt and decrypt features of Linux to provide volume encryption from the OS and data transcripts. And then you've got your transparent data encryption, so the TDE, and the Azure SQL database and Azure Data Warehouse against threat of malicious activity, performing real-time encryption and decryption of the database and associated data backups. So, but what about all your company secrets, right? Think about your passwords, all that things, right? This is where the Azure Key Vault comes in. So you've got your secrets management, right? So you can use Key Vault to store securely and tightly control access to tokens, passwords, certificates, application programming space, so API keys and other secrets. So the really, really important stuff. And then you've got your key management. So then you can use the Key Vault as the key management solution. A key management makes it so much easier to create and control encryption is used certificate management. Key Vault lets you provision, manage, and deploy public and private secure layers and your layer and security layers, certificates for Azure, which is internally connected resources way more easily. And then in your Azure Key Vault, you have store secrets back security modules, HSMs. The secret keys can be protected either by software or by FIPS 142 level 2 validated HSMs. Now, I'm going to describe security. So this is CSPM. And so it's a tool of a combination of a few services, such as the zero trust based access control. So this considers the active threat level during the access control decisions, also has a real-time risk scoring to provide visibility into top risks. It also has threat and vulnerability managers, so TVM, and establishes a holistic view of organizations' attack surface and risk and integrates it with operations and engineering decision-making. Also, it has a discover sharing risk to understand the data of exposure of enterprise intellectual property on sanctioned and unsanctioned cloud services. And then we have technical policy and threat modeling. So this is the systems that architectures use alongside specific applications. So then you have your cloud security posture management, right? So then there's two features that it provides. You have your visibility. So this helps you understand your current security situation and then your hardening guidance. So this is to help you effectively and efficiently improve your security. So the central feature of cloud that enables you to achieve those goals is secure score. Defender for resources, subscriptions, and organizations for security issues. It then aggregates all the findings into a single score. So it'll tell you at a glance your current security situation. The higher the score, the lower the identity risk level. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud also provides hardening recommendations based on any identified misconfigurations and weaknesses. Use these security recommendations to strengthen the security postures for your organization's Azure's hybrid and multi-cloud resources. And then we have your cloud workload protection, so your CWP. So through cloud workload protection capabilities, Microsoft Defender for Cloud is able to detect, resolve threats to resources, workloads, services. Microsoft Defender for Cloud includes a range of advanced intelligent protections for your workload. So moving on, we have your security baseline. So an Azure security benchmark. So a benchmark contains security recommendations for specific technologies, such as Azure. The Azure security benchmark, so ASB, provides prescriptive best practices and recommendations to help improve the security of your workloads, data, services on Azure. So the Azure security baseline applies the best practices and recommendations for the Azure security benchmark. So here on the slide is 3 examples from the Azure security baseline. So moving on to the next thing is we'll describe all about Sentinel. So cybersecurities will often escalate activities in times of national or global crisis, think COVID, and we're all going on our computers, and they're looking to exploit the situation, finding ways into your organization. Having a resilient and robust industry standard set of tools can help mitigate and prevent these exploits. Security incident and event management, so CM, and then you also had your security orchestration automated response, SOAR. I like to think raw, but with an S, how I remember it. And then you have extended detection and response, XDR, provides excellent security insights and security automation that can enhance an organization's network and security perimeter. But I'll quickly explain a bit more about these. So you have the CM system, and that's a tool that an organization uses to collect the data across the whole estate, including the infrastructure, software, and resources. It does analysis, looks for correlations or anomalies, and generates alerts and incidences. A SOAR system then takes the alerts from many sources, such as the CM system, and the SOAR system then triggers action-driven automated workflows and processes to run security tasks that mitigate the issue. And then also you have the
Hey, Cailin,
that's designed to integrate security across an organization. Oh, sorry.
you're I don't know if it's just for me, so I'll have to verify with others. Your internet's getting a little bit choppy.
Oh, okay. In that case, I might quickly change then to that. So do you want to just maybe take off the slides and I'll change the internet?
I don't know that the slides get uploaded somewhere. It might be enough if we just turn off your camera, because
Okay.
that'll reduce what needs to be sent.
Cool. I appreciate the split. Cool. Is that a bit better?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for telling me. I appreciate that. Okay,
So
cool. So I explained SIEM, SOAR, and XDR. So moving on though, we have the Microsoft Sentinel, which is the integrated threat protection. So this diagram shows the end-to-end functionality of Microsoft Sentinel. So first collects the data at a cloud scale across all users, devices, and applications, and infrastructure, both on premise and in multiple clouds, and then detect previously uncovered threats, minimize false positives using analytics and unparalleled threat and intelligence, and then investigate threats with AI, enhance suspicious activities at scale, tapping into decades of cybersecurity work at Microsoft. And then we have respond to incidents rapidly with built-in orchestration and automation of common security tasks. Microsoft Sentinel helps enable end-to-end security operations. It starts with log ingestion and continues through to automated response to security alerts. So there's quite a lot of things that Microsoft Sentinel can do, ranging from connecting Microsoft Sentinel to your data, having playbooks, which is a collection of procedures that help you automate and orchestrate your response, to investigation, hunting, so using the search queries to constantly look for threats and act before anything can be done. So with Microsoft Sentinel, threat protection is continuously evolving battlefront. Cyber criminals are so intelligent, and they are looking for any vulnerability they can to exploit, to steal, damage, or extort company data, assets, and resources. Microsoft provides a suite of tools that give an extended detection and response, XDR, through Microsoft. It is a beautiful amount of tools. Microsoft provides a suite of tools that give an extended detection response, XDR, through Microsoft 365 Defender and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Both tools integrate smoothly with Microsoft Sentinel to provide a complete and thorough threat protection capability for your organization. So moving on to lesson 4, I'm going to describe some Microsoft 365 Defender. This tool is epic. So Microsoft 365 Defender is an enterprise defense suite that protects against sophisticated cyber attacks. So with Microsoft 365 Defender, you can natively coordinate the detection, prevention, investigation, and response to threats across emails, identities, and applications. Microsoft 365 Defender allows admins to assess threat signals from applications, emails, and identity to determine the attack scope and impact. It gives greater insight into how the threat occurred, what systems have been affected. Microsoft 365 Defender then can take automated action to prevent or stop the attack. So there's quite a few suite protections. You've got endpoints, so I'll go into them in the next few slides. But you have endpoints with Microsoft Defender for endpoint. Then you have email and collaboration with Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Then you have your identities with Microsoft. So that's Defender for Identity and Azure AD Protection. And then lastly, you have your applications with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Points. So starting off, we have Microsoft Defender for Identity, formerly Azure Protection. So for those that have been working with Azure for a little bit, that was formerly Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Azure ATP. And that's a cloud-based security solution. It uses your on-premise data, Active Directory data, called signals, to constantly identify, detect, and investigate advanced threats, compromised identities, and malicious inside actions directed at your organization. Microsoft Defender for Identity covers these key areas. It monitors and profile user behavior and activities, protects users' identities, and reduces the attack surface, and then identifies suspicious activities and advanced attacks across the cyber kill chain. So as George was mentioning before, if he was logging into Perth at the same time, someone's trying to log into his account from London, that's not physically possible yet. Time travel will split our bodies in half isn't possible just yet. So anyway, so if that event occurs, someone's trying to log into George's account in London, then Microsoft Identity is going to quickly swoop in and save the day and be like, oh, no, this is not working. And then it will potentially block George and assess the situation. So these actions will then prevent any incidences from occurring. And then moving on, we have Microsoft Defender for Office 365, formerly Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. Safeguards your organization against malicious threats posed by email messages, links, URLs, and collaboration tools, including Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and other Office clients. So Microsoft Defender for Office 365 covers these key areas, including threat protection policies, producing reports, threat investigation and response capabilities, and automated investigation and response capabilities. Microsoft 365 Defender for Office is available in 2 plans. So the plan you choose influences the tools you'll see. And it's important to make sure you select the best plan that meets your organization's needs. So in Microsoft Defender for Office 365 Plan 1, you are getting protection from malicious attachments and potential phishing links that has tools that integrate with Office 365 tools like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. And this integration is going to add a layer of protecting the sharing of files. But then you have Defender Plan 2. This plan includes all of the features in Plan 1, but it's going to provide automation, real-time investigation, remediation, and simulation tools to help protect your Office 365 suite. And then moving on, we have your Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, formerly Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, is a platform designed to help enterprise networks protect endpoints. This allows you to secure your user's device like laptops or phones. So it's important to note that an endpoint is essentially just a point of access into your network. So how Microsoft Defender for Endpoint works, it essentially is preventing, detecting, investigating, responding to advanced threats. So here, endpoint behavioral sensors collect and process signals from operating system, cloud security analytics that turn signals into insights, detections and recommendations, and threat intelligence to identify attacker tools, techniques, and generates alerts. So here, the features include the threat and vulnerability management, attack surface reduction, the next generation protection, and endpoint detection and response. And lastly, your automated investigation and remediation, as well as obviously the Microsoft threat experts. And then moving on, we finally have at the end, we've got Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. So moving to the cloud increases flexibility for employees and IT teams. However, it also introduces a new challenges and complexity for keeping your organization secure. To get the full benefit of cloud apps and services, an IT team must find the right balance for supporting access while protecting critical data. I think that CIA I was telling you guys before. So it's a comprehensive cross-SaaS solution that operates as an intermediate between cloud user and cloud provider. So what is that cloud access security broker? Well, it acts as a gatekeeper to broker real-time access between your enterprise users and the cloud resources they use, wherever they're located and whatever device they're using. So they address security gaps in organizations with the use of cloud services. Protection is provided by many capabilities across the areas. So visibility to detect all cloud services, data security, threat protection, and compliance. These capability areas represent the basis of the Cloud App Security Framework described below. So this Cloud App Security Framework involves discovering the control and the use of shadow IT, so identifying the cloud apps and the IaaS and PaaS services used by organization, and it then will protect your sensitive information anywhere in the cloud, as well as protecting against cyber threats and abnormalities, and then it will assess your cloud app compliances. So moving on to lesson 5 is explaining the security capabilities of Microsoft 365. So Microsoft 365 Defender Portal, previously the Microsoft 365 Security Center, combines protection, detection, investigation, and response to email collaboration and identities and device threats in Central Portal. So here you can view the security health of your organization, active configure devices, users, and apps, and get alerts for suspicious activity. So the Microsoft Defender portal helps security admins and security operation teams manage and protect the organization. So the Microsoft 365 Defender portal homepage shows many of the common cards the security team needs. The composition of cards and data depends on the user role. Because the Microsoft 365 Defender portal uses role-based access control, different roles will see cards that are more meaningful to their day-to-day jobs. The Microsoft 365 Defender portal allows admins to tailor the navigation pane to meet daily operational needs. And then admins can then customize the navigation pane to show or hide functions and services based on their specific preferences. So on the page, you have your home, incidences, alerts, all the way from Action Center, Threat Analytics, Secure Score, and more. And I'll get through, and then one really important one though in the portal is Microsoft Secure Score. So that is a representation, and I explained about this a little bit before a few slides ago, but I'll go into again the Secure Score because it's probably one of the most important things to know. So essentially what it is, it's a representation of the company's security posture. The higher the score, the better your protection. So the security score helps organizations report on the current state of the security and posture. It improves the security posture by providing discoverability, visibility, guidance, control, and then compares benchmarks to establish key performance indicators, so KPIs. So points are given for the following actions: configuring recommended security features, doing security-related app tasks, and addressing improvement actions with third-party applications or softwares as an alternate mitigation. And then we have your security reports and dashboards. So the Microsoft 365 Defender portal includes a report section. This is also incredibly important and incredibly useful. So the reports related to endpoints and reports related to emails and collaborations. So the general security report shown in the slide enables admins to security report, view information about security trends and track protection statuses of your identities, data, devices, apps, and infrastructure. So by default, cards are grouped into the following categories, as I mentioned: identities, data, devices, apps. So an example, the cards are grouped by category. And the identity category includes cards for users at risk and global admins. And then a data category, we find the several cards, including users with the most shared files and third-party DLP policy matches. You can then also group cards by topic, and then you can rearrange the cards and groups into various areas. So the use of the report section to view security trends across organization, track your protection of your organization device, apps, identities, and data. So really a report just to really see where you're at in terms of your security. But what happens if there is an incident? do not fear. Also, before I can explain what actually happens if there is incidents, I'll just remind you what the definition of incidents could be. So incidences are a collection of correlated alerts created when suspicious event is found. So for example, if someone was logging into George's, the same kind of example, if someone was logging into George's account from London at the exact same time he's going from Perth. So alerts are generated from different device, user, and mailbox entities and can come from many different domains. So these alerts are automatically aggregated by Microsoft 365 Defender. It's the grouping of these related alerts that form an incident. The incident provides a comprehensive view and context of the attack. Security personnel can then use incidents to determine where attacks started, what methods were used, and to what extent the attack has progressed within the network. And then they can also determine the scope of the attack and how many users and devices and mailboxes were affected, and the severity of the attack can also be determined. So what's also really awesome, right, is incident management. So in Microsoft 365 Defender, you can manage incidents on devices, user accounts, and mailboxes. So you can manage all the incidences by selecting one from Incidents queue. Incidents are automatically assigned a name based on the alert, but you can edit the name of an incident, and then from there you can then resolve it and set its classification and determination. You can then also assign the incidents to yourself and add incident tags and comments. So now, lastly, before I end the module, I'm going to describe the endpoint security with Microsoft Intune. So now we're going to focus on mobile device and mobile application management. So here you can control how your organization's devices, including mobile phones, tablets, and laptops, are used. You can also configure specific policies to control applications. For example, you can prevent emails from being sent to people's outside organizations, and then Intune will allow people into your organization to use their personal devices for school or work. So with Intune, admins can support a diverse mobile environment, set rules and configure settings on personal organization-owned devices, deploy and authenticate apps for both on-premise and mobile applications, and protect your company information. And lastly, being sure that your apps are compliant with your security management. But users with personal devices may not want their phones to be under full corporate control. That's where MAM comes in, mobile application management, and that gives admin the ability to protect corporate data at the application level, where users just want to access apps like email and Microsoft Teams. Admins can then use application protection policies without requiring the device to be enrolled in Intune, which is really awesome if people just want. Especially also works great with remote workers as well. So lastly, so when admins want to configure a management security task for at-risk devices, they will be using the endpoint security node in Intune. Here the endpoint security node includes the all devices view, where you'll see a list of devices from your Azure AD that are available in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So from this view, it's really awesome. You can select devices to drill in from more information, such as which policies a device isn't compliant with. You can also use the use access from the view to remediate issues for a device. Then you have your Microsoft Security Baseline, which I was telling you about before, which is our ongoing list of applications, including Microsoft Edge, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and more. So that security baselines are preconfined groups of windows setting that help admins apply recommended security actions. And then here also, you have the use of policies to manage the device security, as well as using device compliance policy. And so that is the end of my module. Thank you guys for listening, and one more module to go, and I will hand it over to George. Again, thank you guys for being also so patient with my technical difficulties.
It wasn't too bad. It was only like once, and then it came good, and then it got quite bad. So I said something.
I appreciate it. Easy.
Awesome. So we're talking about Microsoft compliance solutions. So compliance is the other half of the security story. When you get licensing, if you get what's called the Microsoft 365 E5 license, it includes all of the security products, which is, well, not all of them, but like all of the Defender products, which are targeted at users, as well as the purview products, which are largely compliant. So we're going to go through and talk about these things. Oh, wait.
Right, yeah. Also, would you like to get control? Yeah, cool. Easy.
There we go. Thank you, Cailin. And I think Cailin's been doing an awesome job. Does everyone agree? Thumbs up or claps for Cailin, please. Nice. People are awake and alive still. That's what we like to see. So let's cover off the compliance solutions, and if we have chance afterwards, we can do some questions as well. So compliance is a weird thing in security, because a lot of the time people think compliance is simply following standards, and having blind compliance is a term. Or if you're on Reddit, you may have heard of malicious compliance. But that's not really the way that the terms are used in this instance. It's more about how you can measure what your environment is against a standard. So compliance is often used to protect data. So you'll see in the first one, granting individuals the right to access their data at any time, granting individuals the right to correct or delete data about them if needed, introducing minimum or maximum retention periods for data. So businesses need to store data for a certain period of time. And depending on where they are in the world, these requirements vary quite a lot. And it could be that if you're in Europe or you're a European citizen, you'll have what's called the GDPR standard, General Data Protection something, regulation. Either way, one of the key things in GDPR was the right to be forgotten. So whilst retention is important, you need to also understand if the data is completely removed. So these are the sorts of compliance things. It's all around how you manage the data, how you can give access to the data safely, how you can give access to the right data safely. So compliance is important for business. Another area of compliance that, like from a different lens, is how Microsoft complies with its obligations. There's many stakeholders that Microsoft is obligated to. The primary one are its customers, but then Microsoft also has to adhere to the regulatory standards for running a business in the regions that it operates in. So there are a lot of different layers of compliance. The Service Trust portal provides a really visible set of documentation that explains how Microsoft meets or exceeds all of its obligations. Microsoft runs on trust, and if we're not trustworthy, then organizations won't trust us to store their data, because we hold companies' whole data sets. So it's important for us to be able to prove that we're A, trustworthy, B, compliant with all of the regulatory requirements for the organization's geographic location where they're engaging with Microsoft. And I guess just, we exceed the requirements, but that's also because different companies will have different requirements according to their policies. So if we only just meet the minimum requirement, then we may not meet a higher level of requirement for other things. I guess the other thing is, in Australia, they've got the Canberra region, or the AU Central, it's called, and that also has a different level of protection, and that's largely because of the requirements for the federal government. But the Service Trust portal is where you can go to find out about this. So we have the privacy principles that we rigidly follow. First and foremost, we put you in control of your privacy with easy to use tools and clear choices. We don't obfuscate, we don't hide what we do. Our business model does not rely on advertising, right? So, you are not the product when you are a customer of Microsoft. So you have control over the privacy of your data. We're very transparent about what we do and don't collect. Admittedly, we collect a lot. So you have to be, the onus is still on the customer to understand what is collected, but we are very transparent about what we collect. We make sure that everything that we store on behalf of our customers is stored appropriately. Cailin mentioned it before, data in Azure is stored using BitLocker technology. BitLocker is the same encryption technology that's used on Windows devices. And BitLocker's, like a technology/product name, but it's backed by industry standard strong encryption. So it's not the sort of encryption that you'd be able to easily break even with the power of a nation state. We also, leverage our size and resources. So we have strong legal representation. We have a whole internal legal organization that staff members can turn to make sure that we're doing the right thing, as well as to guide Microsoft to make sure that everything it does is lawful and also, I guess, right. So just reiterate, there's no content-based targeting. So it's not like, we're going to talk about Black Friday and all the awesome sales that JB has, and now you're going to have more adverts to JB. You still might, because you might have Facebook open in the background, but it won't be coming from us. And when we do collect data, we do it so that we can improve the product and make the experience better. We don't collect it just simply for the sake of collecting it. I mean, being pragmatic about it, we have a lot of customers, and if we were just storing data because, we're squirrels trying to store nuts away for the winter, they'd probably send us broke, right? We're the third largest company in the world, but like storing data without purpose is still very expensive. So it's not meaningful. So now you understand our compliance goals. You can see how you can engage with your Microsoft services, and that's through the Compliance Center, though it may have been renamed to the Purview portal. So in the Compliance Center, you can go through and have a look at, there's a thing called the Compliance Manager, which allows you to measure your organization against the A or many standards. And if you're using premium templates, it will automatically collect a lot of that information so that evaluation is done in part for you. You can also go through and do things like e-discovery. So you can search through your tenant for information. You might have a request from law enforcement you might be subpoenaed for a court case or something similar. You're not always the person having done something wrong if you need to provide information. So the tools in there are there to help provide that. You'll see on the alerts are there like security alerts, but you might have data loss prevention policies or other compliance type policies. And when the compliance requirement is broken, it goes into alerts. And that's not always going to be as a result of a cyber crime. So having compliance alerts separate to the security alerts means that you can have like an internal information management team looking into it and separate the concerns a bit more. There's quite a lot in here, and I'm sure we'll go through as we go through. This is the Compliance Manager I spoke about. It's very in-depth, and it's, I think, an underutilized tool for organizations. I went through and did this with an organization in New South Wales for an application they developed. And that application needed to be compliant with the health privacy principles of New South Wales. So we built a compliance template and then had an interview with the people who developed the application, and we're able to evaluate how compliant they were with the standards. So that one was a custom template, so it didn't have that automatic check, but it still gave the same outcome where we were able to evaluate compliance. And now they have proof because you're able to take screenshots of how you're meeting that compliance. So if they were ever audited, they could produce that report. So it's very powerful. And when you're using the built-in templates, you'll see this tab here is improvement actions. There's, best practice recommendations from Microsoft on how you can improve the compliance posture of your organization. You'll see here with the compliance score, we've got the improvement action, and then there's points. So it's gamified a little bit with this template, and it's a bit small, but it's 57 points achieved out of 6,253. So there's a bit of work that could be done in this organization. And then Microsoft always does this little humble brag and shows that it's meeting its side with the 14,000 points out of 14,000 points, right? So, but that's still important because it shows that your obligations in part are still being met by being a part of Microsoft. So it's important because your organization is responsible for its data. And if you choose to put your data with a third party, which is Microsoft in this instance, it's still your responsibility to ensure that data is stored according to all of the compliance standards or regulatory standards that your organization must meet. And that's why we have the Service Trust Portal, because we've done that assessment. So you can go into the Service Trust Portal and pull those reports aligned to the standards that you must meet. So you can show how like the infrastructure side of it is, and then you might have the parts relating to the config. So in that shared responsibility model that Cailin referred to in the first module, there's some parts that Microsoft are responsible for, like in terms of configuration, managing, maintaining, backing up, all of that stuff. And then there's things that you're responsible for, and that's like your configuration, your access control, and other things. So with that shared responsibility, it's absolutely important here. That's why you'll see that we take our responsibility serious with the Microsoft Managed side, and we hope that our customers will also take their side serious. Information protection and governance. So information protection and governance is all around understanding what information you have, what you're doing to protect that information, what you're doing to stop the information from being siphoned out of your organization, and how you're doing your governance or how you're governing your data. So knowing your data is important for a couple of reasons. If you're looking at it from a security lens, how can you protect what you do not understand? If you're looking at it from a financial lens, what is the value of your data and how can you quantify it if you don't understand what you have? And if you're looking at it from a compliance lens, how can you make sure you're treating your data appropriately if you don't know your data? So it's very important, and it's actually an area that most businesses really fail in from compliance and security, and that's having like a really good understanding of their assets, and assets include the data. So you'll protect your data, and that might be including things with access control, putting it in secure locations. You might encrypt it while it's at rest. You might encrypt it whilst it's being transmitted. But you can also do other things. You can label your data. So if your data is for general consumption, you can have a general label. If your data is confidential for the business, you can have a confidential label. Now, a label is just a label to give a user a visual marking, but then you can also use those labels in the compliance systems so that you can have, if this document is labeled general, right, like, do nothing. If it's labeled confidential, then you can make it so that only certain people in your business are able to get it, or that it won't, it's not allowed to leave your Office 365 tenant. And then you can make it so that, well, sometimes you need to have confidential stuff leave the Office 365 tenant. So maybe you'll change the label. So if that label is changed, then you can make it so that it triggers a security alert so that you know when confidential information has been reclassified. So, there's a lot of protections that you can put in place, and all of these alerts will show up in the alert tab of the compliance portal. You can also have it show up in the security portal too. So understanding your data is like the key thing of the information protection, information governance, and applying the appropriate controls for them. So we spoke around sensitive information types briefly when I said labels. So you can attach a label to classify based on the information type. And then if it's a sensitive one, you can have like your sensitivity labels. And that is, again, like whether it's not sensitive, a little bit sensitive, highly sensitive. You can have your trainable classifiers. So Microsoft has classifiers built in, and then you can also have a custom trained classifier. A classifier is something that's able to look at the data within a document and classify it automatically for you. So some things are really easy. You know, a driver's license in Western Australia looks the same. It's got 7 digits. And it usually has D-L next to it, or license or driver's license. So there'd be enough that you would be able to confidently detect driver's license. But, you know, like some of the pre-trained classifiers all around medical terms, credit card numbers, passport numbers, addresses, whatever could be considered sensitive. So your privileged personal identity, personally identifiable information, for instance. Once you've got all of your information types determined, you can actually have like a view of what information in your environment matches those types. So coming back to what I just said, it's important to know what data you have so you know how to train it, how to manage it or govern it appropriately. You can actually use those classifications to explore the data in your 365 tenant. You can also do it with your on-premises environment as well if you've got file servers there, but you need to install some agents and set it up. But if you're using cloud only, it's all very simple. It's all done for you. And then the Activity Explorer, once you've gone through and taken the time to set up your governance, you can actually see what's happening with that data and understand whether or not either staff are labeling things properly, or once it's labeled, if it's going to the right places and being managed appropriately. So it's, you know, it's very important. And this allows you to do your compliance obligation to the organization. So sensitivity labels are customizable, they're clear text, and they're persistent, right? And you use them to encrypt your email, mark the content. You can have labels automatically applied, and they're applied through a labeling policy. And then based on the label, you can, you know, protect your content. You can also extend that sensitivity label to other third-party apps and services, like just say you're using a file service instead of SharePoint Online. Even just SharePoint, like OneDrive, the consumer one, or Dropbox, or Box.net, or FileShare by Citrix. There's lots of them. You can extend it there, and you can classify the content just so it's classified, but you don't have to do anything with it. But once that label has been applied, you can then have it automatically do things. So you can apply a default label to all new emails and documents. You can, like I mentioned before, you can justify if you change that label. You can make it so that if you don't have a label, you can't save the document. And once you've got your label strategy in place and operating, then you can also have different levels of automation and reporting. So data loss prevention is a feature that, as the title describes, puts in place things to stop data from being stolen, right? So it can automatically detect content without a label being applied to it, or it can use labels. And with the data loss prevention, it actually works hand in glove with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Defender for Endpoint is installed on the endpoint, and it monitors through a network filter all of the traffic that goes in and out of the network card. So it's able to detect whether or not any of that network traffic is data that is protected under data loss prevention. So examples of that might be your Office documents. You can also with the endpoint data loss prevention, stop other malicious behaviors. So data loss prevention isn't always about someone stealing. It could also be about people just deleting large amounts of data, printing sensitive stuff, renaming files. And you can also have that data loss prevention in teams. So as an example of some DLP stuff, by default, Microsoft has meeting policies. So you'll note that when you came to join the meeting, you had to wait to be admitted. That way we can have a meeting and be sure of the people that are in the meeting. And if we share files in that meeting, not everyone's able to get it unless it's configured a certain way. Like there's lots of controls, and that's all data loss. All right, so with the data loss prevention, basically you'll see in the picture, you'll have a condition, and if the data matches a condition, there'll be an action, and that action will be either an allow or it will be a block. Actually, there's a third. There'll be an audit option as well. So retention labels are different to sensitivity labels. A sensitivity label determines how sensitive the content is. A retention label determines how long you should keep that content. All right. And as I mentioned before, you don't necessarily want to keep everything forever. Sometimes, or rather, there's a cool sticker which says no log, no crime. I mean, it's cool if you're a security person at a black hat conference. Probably not cool if you're trying to protect an organization. But anyway, you need to retain data for, like in WA, there's the State Records Act, and says that what you must retain for certain labels on your data, and then have a retention policy applied to that label and manage how long that data is kept, right? So you can apply your retention policy to locations, whether it's a mailbox, a 365 group. If it's a 365 group, then it's all of the resources that belong to that group, including the users and the users' resources. And essentially, like, having these retention labels and policies is a way of automating your data lifecycle. Records management. Records are a different kettle of fish to just regular data. A record is like a legal document that can be called upon to be used in case something needs to be proven without doubt. So a record, once created as a record, cannot be changed, right? And often a record cannot be deleted, at least during the period of time that you're obliged to keep that record. But then once that record is no longer required to be kept, you should delete the record, because context changes a lot, and it would be terrible if you had a record from 20 years ago that would incriminate you against something now. So you should always only keep records or any data for as long as it's useful, for as long as it needs to be kept according to the organizational policies, and then get rid of it. So with the records management, when something's marked as a record, then it's treated differently to regular data, and then it will be disposed of. Cool. Insider risk capabilities. Whenever I see that term, I always think of a James Bond movie or some covert operative, maybe Mr. Robot when he went to work for Evil Corp. But basically what it is it allows you to know, like, when a staff member is likely to leave or is leaving because they've handed in their notice. And then, there's already a lot of analytics applied to the user behavior so that we can understand when stuff is, when user activity is suspicious. But, the level of scrutiny on someone leaving should be a little bit higher. It's not often that someone leaves because they're really happy. I mean, sometimes people leave because they're happy, they just got a better offer, but a lot of the time they're leaving because they're unhappy, they might have a grudge. So with the insider risk management, it automatically is linked in with the HR. So when notice is given, a different set of policies are applied for that user. And additional alerts will be created if the behavior that that user exhibits is one of a malicious user or someone stealing IP before they're leaving, or, you know, just not that friendly handover that you'd like. The communication compliance also allows you to detect, capture, and act on inappropriate messages in your organization. So inappropriate could be overly familiar or casual if there's a policy on how people should communicate, but there's many other ones like sexual harassment, bullying, racial discrimination, all of these things. The communication compliance can, in an automated fashion, monitor it and raise alerts when it sees it's occurring. Probably want to have a acceptable use policy or some other policy that the staff sign if you're going to be monitoring them, so that they're aware of it. But yeah, and then information barriers means that you're able to make it so that users can only put information in their box. I can't think of a better way to describe it, but just say you've got two different teams or two different companies sharing a 365 environment, and there could be some really legitimate legal reasons why they can't see information from the other team or other organization. You can put a barrier in place. So whilst they're still sharing the same 365 tenant and are still managed by that same administrators and whatnot, that it's essentially in some ways two different tenants. Privileged access management. So that allows you to control over who can do what in Exchange Online only. So we had privileged identity management before, and that one was for all of the Azure AD roles. The privileged access management is specific to Exchange Online. But Exchange Online does all of the mail as well as all of the Teams chat. So it's probably important to have that granular level of control there. Customer lockbox is a simple feature that allows a user in an organization, like an admin user in an organization, to enable Microsoft to see specific information through a support case. So it's a pretty limited use case, but normally, like you would maybe assume that if you reached out for support, that the Microsoft support engineer would be able to see inside the tenant, and that's not the case. It's technical support. Much like if you're calling your internet provider or not, they've got knowledge on the product and they can see sort of account related information, but they can't see information in your tenant. And, you know, if we go back to Microsoft's stance on privacy and whatnot, you know, if it were possible for a support person to just look into your tenant environment, then that would violate some of those principles. So that customer lockbox gives a way that you can give approval for the support engineer to have a look at the data and take it away. So e-discovery and audit. Briefly spoke about these already, which is great. So e-discovery allows you to find information that could be used if your company or a member of your staff are involved in litigation. And it allows you to search through all of the data sources in your 365 environment. So that's your Exchange Online, 365 groups, Teams, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business sites, Skype for business conversations, and your Yammer teams. So the user doesn't actually know that you've done this. It's like a covert thing, and it's quite invasive. So that's why that privileged access management thing is there. You might want to give access to administer the environment, but have a different set of users who can do e-discovery but not manage the environment. And there are Azure AD roles to do this, but if you're using the principle of least privilege, you might not be comfortable with the level of permission that those roles give. So you can use the PAM. And with PAM, you can choose which users they can do these things for as well. So you can have it even more granular. With the eDiscovery, if you're using a compliance administrator or a global administrator, you can do it through the whole tenant and every user and every asset. Content search is a little bit different. See, the eDiscovery is done in a very particular way so that chain of trust can be maintained, because you don't want to provide evidence to show someone's not guilty, but then have that evidence dismissed because you can't prove that the evidence wasn't tampered with. So eDiscovery provides that that proof in that it was, as at the time it was captured, it hasn't been modified. Content search is a little bit less serious, but it still has the ability to search through the same data sources, but better tools to search through. But you're not going to put that hold on the data like you would with eDiscovery. So you have two different workflows for your eDiscovery. First, you create your eDiscovery hold, you search for that content, and then you export and download the search results. So that's the simple one. It's available to any license. Then you've got the advanced eDiscovery workflow, which is not. You have to have, I think you need to have the Defender Premium, Defender for Office P2 in order to get it, though I'm not great with licensing because I don't sell, thankfully. But advanced eDiscovery allows you to create the case, but then add a custodian. So that custodian doesn't necessarily have to be really privileged. And it could be that custodian's in a legal team. And then that custodian can do the activity. So they can search the data sources. They add data to a review set. And then they also review and analyze the data in it, and then they download it. See, this one here just grabs all the content that matches like some pretty basic search terms. But this one here, you can be really specific and take out only what is needed. Typically, this one here would be an administrator. And even if they've got the time, they probably don't have the right skill set to audit it properly. Whereas with this one, it's created by an administrator, but someone with the right skill set to do that audit does the evaluation. So audit capabilities. Now, I mentioned audit before, and that's because it's auditing the data that's been captured through the eDiscovery. This is a different type of audit. This audit is actually looking at the administrative or user actions that occur in your Microsoft 365 tenant. So that could be opening emails, that could be saving files to OneDrive, that could be creating users, deleting users, changing passwords. Like there's many actions that are audited, and they're all available to be searched. Now, when you have an on-premises Windows Active Directory or any on-premises server, even an IaaS server, now I think about it, you have the event log. So you can go through, and based on what is being audited, you can see what has occurred. When you're using a cloud service, you don't have that log necessarily, but you do, and it's the audit log, and that's the slide we're looking at. So you can get to that audit log through the compliance portal. You need to have the right privilege to do that search, but then you can have a search through. There's different levels of the auditing. There's the core audit and there's the advanced audit. The advanced audit requires the compliance license, I believe, which is a part of E5. But there are differences between the two. So the core audit doesn't retain the log for as long. Does it say how long? So the regular audit log is like a year, and the advanced audit can go up to 10 years. But that regular audit might only be 90 days as well, to be honest. I spend all my day in the threat protection. I don't spend much time in compliance, fortunately. But the key difference is the advanced audit has a longer retention, and you can do a lot better searches, and you can also programmatically search using the Office 365 Management API, which is an absolute beast of data set. Like, it's very, very large. So you can do some very good searching and understanding activity. All right, and you can see here 4 items that they've got, like if you're investigating mail or mail being stolen, so mail items access, send, search, query initiated exchange, search, query initiated SharePoint. I mean, these last 2 would be really useful as well for a security investigation. Resource governance capabilities in Azure. All right. So resource locks are super useful because you can spend a lot of time building an environment, or you can have an environment automated with its build. But by default, any user with an appropriate level of permission can mess it up really easily because you can just delete or you can make changes. So if you put a resource manager lock on, then you've got 2 levels of control. One is cannot delete, so they can still mess it up by changing config, or read only, so they can review the config. Even if they're the owner, they can only review the config. All right, and then with Azure, there's different levels where you can apply a permission. So you've got the resource level, you've got the resource group level, you've got a subscription level, and then you've got a management group level. And you can apply resource manager locks at multiple levels. I probably wouldn't put a resource management lock at a subscription or management group because that would be frustrating. But based on the operating model for that organization is how you would apply that resource lock. Azure blueprints. So when you're creating a resource, if you're in the portal, you'll go through and just follow a wizard. Or if you're doing it through PowerShell, you would go through and type in the commands. But you do it manually every time. Azure Blueprints allows you to define what a resource type is in your organization. So this is what a VM is, and this is how we want it set up. And then you can use that blueprint to set up the resource. So blueprints are useful for streamlining deployment, but it's also useful, like you can have an Azure policy that only allows resources to be created through blueprints. And then you can also make sure all your blueprints make your resources compliant to your obligations. So it's quite useful. You can see that also in the blueprint, you can have the role assignment automated. You can have policy assignments for Azure policy. You can leverage the ARM template. So ARM templates are basically a template for what a resource looks like. And you can also have resource groups. So it deploys into certain resource groups. Once you've set up your blueprint object, it will be available no matter where your region is, and that region's defined by your subscription. And the relationship between the blueprint definition and blueprint assign is preserved regardless of where it is. So, blueprints from a compliance point of view is useful if you set it up so that you only use the blueprints. And compliance is not always an external obligation. It could be an internal obligation. And you might have a parent company like Microsoft has corporate in the USA, and then we've got a ANZ subsidiary. It might be, there isn't, but it might be that they would have, like, for staff, we only want you to deploy virtual machines using these SKUs. So they could deploy a blueprint. And then when we wanted to spin up a virtual machine, we'd have to use the blueprint. Azure policy. Azure policy is something that you could probably talk about for a whole 2 hours instead of a whole certification. So I'll try and summarize it promptly. But Azure policy is like setting up rules for what your environment must have. So it might be that you'll have a rule in Azure policy saying every Azure resource must be tagged. You could have a rule that's saying every Azure resource in this resource group must have this specific tag. So you can say it must have a tag and then leave it blank, or you can say must have a specific tag. A tag is a key value pair. So you can have a policy that says this key must be present and leave the value empty, or this value, this key and value must be there. Like, that's just one example of policy. Another good example of policy is if you're an Australian company and you have an obligation to keep all of your resources in Australia, you can have a policy that you're not allowed to create resources outside of Australia. And then basically it doesn't prevent the user from trying to create it. At the very end, it'll tell it, oh, sorry, you can't do this. So the user experience there is a bit weird. Another one that's a favorite of mine is if you onboard a server into the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, that was mentioned last module, it automatically will have a policy that says you must onboard the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint client. So then your device is automatically protected with endpoint security. So Azure policy sets up standards that your resources must adhere to. All right, so that's why it's in compliance, because you're setting a policy for compliance, and you need your resources to be compliant. Now, if you have gone through and set up these policies, then you can report on the status of your resources and if they're compliant with that policy. So I've given some really generic low-level ones. It could be that your organization says that we must adhere to a CIS standard. CIS creates standards. There's a CIS for Azure standard. So you can actually import that policy, and then all of your resources in your organization or in your Azure organization will be evaluated against that policy. So there'll be a report, and then you can go through and remediate it. So policy has a couple of purposes. One, it sets a standard or defines what you want your organization's environment to look like. And two, you can set up a response, and that response can be automated, right? So for instance, the MDE agent deployment, and then you've got the reporting, which covers all of it. I guess the other thing which I should mention is it covers resources in Azure and Arc. Arc is used to bring resources, so mainly servers, but also SQL servers, and I think Kubernetes clusters, and they're expanding it all the time from other environments, whether it's an on-premises server, it could be a server hosted in a local data center, or it could be infrastructure hosted in other hyperscalers like AWS, Google Compute, Oracle, any of them. And it leaves them being computed, like the hardware, where they are, but it brings the management of those resources into Azure. So it creates this ability for an organization to use the best resource to host their resources, but then all of the management, irrespective of where it is, can be done in a single place. And the real benefit of that is for your compliance and security obligations all in one place. So that's really useful. All right, we made it to the end. Yay, where's the little clap? How are we feeling? Do we want some knowledge check questions? Or are you all hungry and just want to get some lunch?
I reckon maybe we'll leave it for time for some questions, and then if they do want to do practice questions, they can look on the sample questions that we'll link to them now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did provide the
Oh, true, of course, yeah.
link, but it's not the specific link to the sample questions, which I'll absolutely do, because I know that I often cannot find things. Like right now. Here they are. So Were
Did you
there-
have any ready, George? Did you have any practice ones in the presentation, or you were going to open the?
we have several.
Maybe just do a couple then.
Absolutely. So, that's right. I need to know the answers to them. There's no cheat sheet. That's fine. I'm used to being wrong. So, knowledge check. The first one. If an organization has deployed Microsoft 365 applications to all employees, who is responsible for the security of the personal data relating to these employees? Is it the organization? Is it Microsoft? Or is it a shared responsibility between your organization and Microsoft? So we've got an A, we've got a C, we've got a shared, so that's a C. Another 10 seconds for people to think about it. So I'm going to go with the shared responsibility, though I can absolutely understand why you would think the organization, because the organization's responsible for configuring like your access controls and make sure you're not sort of having OneDrives with links so that anyone can access it and stuff. But you've also got the physical premises hosting the data centers with the data and making sure all of the underlying infrastructure is secured properly. So that's why there's a shared responsibility. I am happy to be wrong if you've got a really compelling argument against it, but like.
Is that how it works in the exam, George? That
No,
people can argue.
You can argue to yourself all you like. I can tell you how it is. But yeah, that one would probably get you the point. So which of the following measures might an organization implement as part of a defense in-depth security methodology? So which of these three might an organization implement? We've got a couple of Bs. Another 10 seconds. And last slip in, B. Yeah, I'm going with B. So if you have everything in a single physical location and there's a flood, then that's a problem. And if there's no segmentation on your corporate network, then that's not secure. That's not good. So by process of elimination, we're happy here. All right. What HR organization? The HR organization wants to ensure that stored employee data is encrypted. What security mechanism would they use? So it's stored employee data. Pick off the mark. We have a C, another C. 10 seconds. So like Cailin said, hashing is a one-way. So you could encrypt and hash all of your data, but it would then be lost. So because it has this stored employee data, and this is in transit, that eliminates it. So it's encryption at rest, which is good. So the next one, an organization is moving their infrastructure to the cloud. They want to know how to create and implement business and technology strategies in a way that will help them succeed in the cloud. Oh, this is a typical question, isn't it? What guidance can they use to help them transition to the cloud? All right. So, well, quick off the mark with the B. Another B. Awesome. So yeah, there is no Cloud Succeed framework. So that we can, cross that one out. And I just gave you a glowing overview of what Azure policy is. So I'm sure you've all evaluated and just cross that one out. So yes, it's the Cloud Adoption Framework. And there's a lot of information on Microsoft Learn around that one. What type of security risk does a phishing scam pose? All right. So we've had a few. So a phishing scam, thank you, is, wow, keep coming in. Nice. A phishing scam is one where you're trying to trick a user into doing an action, and the delivery mechanism is through email. So if it's through email, it's probably not a physical risk. So the first few that had be, it wouldn't be that. And I'm not actually sure what an ethical risk is in security. But I do know that one of the tactics that a phishing scam does is put a huge amount of emotional pressure on the victim to get them to do what they want. So yeah, maybe there, but it's not really. It's identity. They want to steal your credentials. That's what it's for. Phishing, they steal your credentials. All right. Benefit of single sign-on. Awesome. So benefit of single sign-on is that the user signs in once and then can access many resources and applications. Another benefit is a central identity provider can be used. But in this instance, what is the bigger benefit? And that one's like the most obvious the most obvious benefit, and that's the single sign-on. Passwords always expire after 72 days. That's not even good password practice anymore. There was a man who, back in the old days, came up with a set of standards for password management. 2013 or 14, he then said, I did a bad thing and my recommendations are crap. And they actually cause more passwords to be stolen. So password expiry is now seen as a bad thing, just not by many people yet. Which relationship allows Federated Services to gain access to resources? I didn't actually know the answer to this question, so I had to look it up. So I won't feel bad. I think it's I think that's a decent question for a SC 900. So we have one trust. We have a C. So it's Federated Services trust-based relationships, and Cailin did actually go through it and explain it, which was pretty cool. It says that, I will trust the user account from this identity provider as if it were from the identity provider that you're trying to access a resource from. So that's good. So authentication is the process of doing what? Yeah, Caelin's got an offer. Very cool. Yes. So for those who put in the A, that is correct. Authentication is verifying that a user or device is who they say they are. It is not a process of profiling user behavior. That's often seen as user-enhanced behavioral analytics, UEBA, and enabling federated services is just, it is what it is. Do we have a duplicate? Yep. No. No, move on. All right. Your organization is launching a new app for customers. You want your customers to use a sign-in screen that is customized with your brand identity. Which type of Azure external identity authentication solution should you use? I'd expect to see this in AZ204. We have a couple of Bs. Now, I would struggle with this one because I don't think there's enough information. And to be fair, you can customize your brand identity on pretty much all of the Azure AD stuff. So because it's for customers, I'm going to assume that you're not going to give them an account inside your tenant, like with your, licensed account. So I'd probably go for B, like it's been suggested. But based on the information they gave you, it's pretty sketchy. So.
But isn't B2B business to business, whereas B2C is business to customer? And so the fact that it has customer in the question would be the keyword that I would use to pick out were it me.
You can give 50,000, you can have 50,000 free Azure AD user accounts with a tenant, and you don't have to license them, and you can still use that user account to give access to an app, whether it's a web app or other. So this is a case of, knowing too much makes it harder.
I know you can do that, but that they are your customers. If you were doing best practice business, would you not be doing B2C for customers?
No, not necessarily. And you may it might be that you want to use MFA, and MFA is currently not working great well with B2C. But I absolutely see what you're saying and why you would say it. Maybe you don't want people to use. Actually, with B2C, you can get them to sign up and have a non-federated type account as well. But yeah, I know you could do it with either of them, and that's why for me it's kind of but for the question, I'd still answer the B2C one because I think that's the intention of the question. So, but they're both B2B. Yeah, so Azure AD B2B is just Azure AD. Azure AD B2C is another resource you provision in your Azure AD tenant or your Azure tenant. So within your organization, and we might make this the last question, all of your users have Microsoft 365 cloud identities. Which identity model should you use? Hybrid. No. 365B. Yeah. So I would preferably go the cloud only model. They say all your users have 365 cloud identities. But again, we know we can cross out on premise only, and it could be hybrid, but we don't know anything about the organization. And I've seen very large organizations with cloud only, and it works beautifully. It's actually better. It's more secure. So I would probably answer this one.
When you say this one,
Sorry.
that green thing is like swinging all over the place. It's not.
There's another line.
No, it's all over.
So I've done a beautiful, perfect box over cloud only, and you're telling me it's not.
No.
Oh man, I've been using it for weeks, and you're the first person to tell me. So I've just been doodling over slides.
Yeah, like now it's circling cloud only, but it's not always. Like sometimes it's just zipping about, and so when you said I'd choose this one, it was actually drawing a line through on premises only for me.
Yeah, so there's a lag between my voice and my pointer. So that's yeah, because I draw as I'm talking the whole time. I didn't realize that there was a gap there. So cloud only, absolutely. Cloud only is the best way if you can. So yeah. Cailin, do you have anything to say?
No, I'm so happy, guys. Yeah. Sorry, I was went to the bathroom real quick, so I don't know what you. I was trying to pretend that I didn't, but yeah,
That's
I
okay.
don't know what.
No, literally, we're just wrapping up. So I was just giving you an opportunity to.
Oh, of course. No, thank you guys so much for attending. Seriously, and Michelle made like a really awesome post on LinkedIn. And yeah, it's right. It's quite fun, you know, have the two different teaching styles. I feel like it definitely keeps everyone on their toes as well. And it's been a lot of fun, obviously, teaching as well. And it is an incredible course. Thank you guys. And thank you guys for attending and being so like gosh darn attentive. Like it's really nice to see you guys reacting the entire way through.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you as well, and thanks for asking me, Cailin. This was fun. I'm very happy to help out. And for those of you who are in the call, if you want, find me on LinkedIn. If you've got questions, you can ask me there. You could probably find me on Twitter.